One of the things that I've been impressed by in my visit was the interactions and social activities that were going on between deaf and hearing.
Right.
Why did you think that was important?
Well, that was always Megan's idea, that because the other major program in Los Angeles was not a signing program,
Yes.
it was a combination of wanting to facilitate communication between hearing parents and deaf children, and at the same time wanting to facilitate, obviously, communication between hearing kids and deaf kids to sort of reverse mainstream. Jacob was very fortunate because the first teacher, Cindy LaBeouf at the school, she was just magical. She was great. I just, she was a really good teacher. She knew Montessori and she knew signing. I mean, you're really lucky to get a good teacher at that age. My own experience was that I went to a very good public school system, and the older I got in the system, the more I felt just sort of like, I was just another kid. But in the early, it was in Winnetka, Illinois, outside of Chicago. But in the early years, I had a really good kindergarten and really good grade school experience, and it just stuck with me.
Yeah, it's really amazing to me how much of the foundation is established in those early years.
Yeah, but really, it just makes a huge difference to give you the skills.
There was a classroom that was a little bit similar to the model that I envisioned. And the model I envisioned was that you put deaf and hearing children together. You bring in two teachers, one of whom is a deaf educated, licensed
Teacher of the deaf.
credentialed teacher of the deaf, and the regular ed teacher. And you just make sure that everybody can sign. Everybody, hearing children, hearing teachers, so that you break that barrier down. And
so break down what's often the barrier to peer interaction between people who are deaf and people who are hearing.
Mm-hmm. And I felt that if we could break down the barrier, then the primary issues and problems and challenges of deafness would go away.
Do you feel that happened?
I do feel that happened. I really do. It took a while for the hearing children and teachers to become fluent in sign language. So at the preschool and at the parent, infant, and preschool level at Tripod, we had our deaf and hard of hearing children. And the hearing children we brought in were either siblings or coda. So they had some language, they could model some sign language. Once our children got into kindergarten and started going through elementary school, we were it was a public school setting ultimately, so the hearing children who came in didn't know sign language and didn't have any relationship to deafness. But by the third or fourth grade, their hands were flying.
Well, they're like sponges.
Yeah.
At that age, they just soak it up. Do you feel that contributed significantly to the social development of both deaf and hearing?
Absolutely. It was very funny because in the beginning, a lot of the parents did not want their hearing children in the class with the deaf children.
So they were resistant at the outset.
They were resistant.
And what made the change?
One thing that made the change was that we had two teachers in the classroom. So we had a class of 30 students with two teachers, and 10 of those students were deaf. So that's a 15-to-1 ratio in a public school setting.
Unheard of.
You weren't going to find that in any other classroom. So that was one difference. And then the second difference was the excitement and comfort that the hearing students had being in the classroom with the deaf students.
And of course, they brought that home to their parents and expressed that excitement, and the parents saw the benefit, I assume.
Right. And so, within a few years, parents were asking to have their children in.
I want my son or daughter in.
Exactly. And then the other thing is academically, it really did raise the bar of what was going on in the classroom. The teachers with the deaf credential knew how to organize a classroom in a different way. I'm not saying it was a better way,
Different.
but it was a very clear way, for the deaf
To
students.
assure that the deaf students were having access.
Right, and visually it was a little bit clearer and calmer. The methodologies they used for teaching reading were different from the regular ed
And
classroom.
did that positively affect the hearing kids that were in
It
there?
did, it did. And so essentially the hearing children were now in a bilingual setting, which was, English and ASL. So by the end of a few years, it was truly amazing because our school, this is after we moved to Burbank, and our school, not only did you see children, on the playground and sports and at social events and in the classroom, everybody signing. So you didn't know who was deaf at this
Well, I
point.
have to tell you, I did visit
Oh,
school, and I was watching the children interact with each other, and I was thinking to myself, okay, who's deaf in here? I mean, I was really struggling, but then, there's certain characteristics that deaf kids display, and I said, okay, now I know who they are. But at first, they were
right.
very comfortable together. I know for a lot of deaf youth, it's very difficult for them to find deaf role models. Can you talk about how you built that into your tripod experiences for these young people?
Well, as you obviously know, the vast majority of deaf children are born to hearing parents, like our son was to us. So they don't come into this world with any deaf role models or any people modeling their language, right? We, from the very beginning,
In tripod.
at Tripod, we knew we wanted deaf individuals at each level of Tripod. So we had deaf board members, we had deaf teachers, we had deaf staff people taking care of the school. And one of the first things we did was we started a program called, I called it Silver Platter Sign Language Class, because we took sign language to the home. And those sign language classes were taught by deaf individuals.
To the hearing parents.
To the hearing parents. We gave each new family free sign language classes in the home for 1 year. And the family could invite anybody they wanted. They could have neighbors, they could have their babysitter.
Grandma, aunt, uncle, anybody.
Anybody. The reason I did it was because I looked for sign language classes for myself. And the classes at the college level weren't appropriate for a new baby. You weren't learning time for bed or time for bath,
Yeah.
Do you want juice or do you want milk?
Yeah, or the baby talk. that
Right.
you use. So the sign language was brought to the homes because these deaf youngsters had hearing parents.
Right, and because it was hard, because we couldn't find a class that was
That
appropriate.
made sense.
Right. And also in Los Angeles, you do end up doing a lot of driving.
Yeah.
And babysitting can become an issue. So that's why I called it Silver Platter Sign. And then after the first year, we had classes for families at the school once a week in the evening at offering different levels, beginning, intermediate, advanced. And we had child care at the same time. And the child care was done by deaf adults. The sign language classes were taught by deaf adults. So the modeling, there was no part of Tripod that you would experience.
Where there wasn't deafness, right?
Exactly.
Board level, library level, teaching level, everywhere.
Exactly.